Hey there, interwebs. Today we're going to take a look at this junkyard car that you may not have known existed. This is a Pontiac Grand Prix with a V8 engine. Let's take a look. Well, here it is. This is a transverse mounted front wheel drive car with a V8 engine. This is an LS V8, believe it or not. This is the only LS V8 to have a transverse configuration for a front wheel drive vehicle. It's actually one of the more forgotten LS's, smaller than most of the rest of the family. This was a 5.3 liter. This made somewhere north of 300 horsepower and in the low 300s pound-feet of torque. I don't know the exact numbers, but this was a bit of an unusual choice for GM. And this car, in a lot of ways, sort of takes the heritage of the Pontiac Grand Prix weirdness and turns it up to 11. So, you know, the Pontiac Grand Prix had a lot of interesting styling cues in the late 80s, early 90s. It was built on an all-new front-wheel drive platform in the 80s. They ended up having a supercharged version that was really popular in the GTP model. And the GTP model almost has a cult-like following. That supercharged V6 found its way into a few GM products, including some Buicks and the Pontiacs. I believe maybe even the Monte Carlo SS. But in a lot of ways, this layout replaces the GTP supercharged engine. And if I'm not mistaken, this particular V8 version, the GXP, was sold at the same time as the supercharged GTP for 1 year. And then after that, the GTP was history. The V8 effectively superseded it. They sold this car for 5 model years, and then this ultimately was replaced, this front-wheel drive platform in its entirety was replaced by the G8, which unfortunately would have been short-lived because of the closure of Pontiac as a brand. And so if you are all about front-wheel drive power in a sedan, look no further. This is definitely a car without a ton of competition. Now, interestingly, this particular engine is found in several other GM products in this layout. And a lot of people know that this went into the Chevrolet Malibu of the same era. It's the body style Malibu that would have been in the movie Drive with Ryan Gosling, if you've seen that film. That car in particular would have been a V6, but that is the body style that they also put a V8 in. That was the Malibu SS. Also, the Chevrolet Monte Carlo SS had this engine, and oddly enough, there's a Buick, I think LaCrosse, that had a super trim level that came with this engine. That's super rare. This car alone is pretty rare, but that one would have been super rare. A lot of people know about the GTP. It is an established option for GM enthusiasts that have, you know, an affinity for that kind of layout. There's some tuning potential for that engine, and this one is just kind of forgotten. It isn't very well known. I've never seen one in person, and really, I don't know if I ever will see one on the road. It's an interesting find. I'm going to go through the car inside out and look at some of the details. Let's take a look at these seats. We've got kind of a sport bucket style. There's sort of a, I don't know, like a suede inner, imitation suede, and then the leather bolster. Looks decently aggressive. Got some padding down here for the leg support. We've got GXP branded gauges. That's a huge speedometer. And let's look at some of the other details here. The door handles are kind of interesting. Perfect circle trim, and then a pull handle. Pretty minimalistic if you look at some of the lines. Grand Prix, and then a little V8 badge. not a whole lot to distinguish it from the rest of the Grand Prix. It doesn't even look like it has any unique body cladding or anything like that. One of the things that I've read about these cars is that they had to make some changes to the LS in order to make it fit in this arrangement. There were some changes to things like the accessory drive pulleys and where the starter is located. You know, you've got this setup where the crankshaft is going this way and the transmission more or less bolts onto the side and likely wraps around and kind of behind the engine like most transverse engines. But that means you're sort of struggling for some real estate in terms of access. You could see some high up motor mounts up here. You can see down into the exhaust manifold for the front bank. You know, normal modern things, coil on plug, stuff like that. This would have been pre-direct injection, of course. This would have been good old-fashioned port injection. And, you know, this is just one of those cars that people who have them really enjoy them. They think they're great. You don't find a lot of people aspiring to own one of these, really. This isn't like the kind of car that someone has on their gotta own one before I die kind of list. It's just this interesting anomaly. And the weak spot apparently is the transmission. So you can kind of tell just from looking in here, space is sort of at a premium. So the crowded engine bay allegedly leads to some higher than typical underhood temperatures, and as a result the transmission has a tendency to run hot. So hot that they are known for failing before 100,000 miles. So that is sort of the known weakness. Obviously we have no way of knowing whether that's why this car is here, but ultimately that is a known weakness. It's a 4-speed automatic with some kind of paddle shifter mechanism. Yeah, tap shift. Tap shift. So apparently there are, yeah, these can either be pushed or pulled. Right, so both of these paddle shifters, as you would call them on any other call, but it's a tap shifter on this car, can allow you to drive with one hand, shift with one hand, excuse me. So you can upshift, downshift with one hand, or you can use both hands. Now, the choice of a 4-speed auto is a little bit weird to me. This is 2006. This car went on sale with this engine in 2005. I mean, everybody else was already using 5 speeds, and I'm pretty sure by then a lot of companies were bringing out 6-speed automatics. So I don't really know why they came out with the high performance version of this car with a 4-speed auto, but that was their choice. It is what it is. Now, GM is certainly not the first company to put a front-wheel drive transverse mounted V8 into a car. That's been around for a very long time. There were a lot of cars in recent history that had this layout. North Star V8s and Cadillacs were one of the more modern pioneers to use this layout. I'm not sure what the first car was. It might have been the Elante convertible, but so many Cadillacs in the 90s were front-wheel drive with a North Star emblazoned right across the top of the engine, and that is a very familiar layout for owners of those cars. There were some other GM products, like the Oldsmobile Aurora had a transverse V8. Other manufacturers got into that game. There was Volvo with the S80 V8, as well as the XC90 had a V8 option. They were, again, transverse mounted. The Ford Taurus, the second generation of the Ford Taurus SHO, would have come with the Yamaha-derived V8. There were others, certainly, but the interesting thing about this layout is that it is very on brand for GM to do this. They had lots of front-wheel drive V8 cars over the years. In fact, they're probably the company that's used it more than any other. And fun fact, when this car came out, GM had a front-wheel drive V8 vehicle for sale in their lineup for every year since 1966, when the Oldsmobile Toronado came out. Now, it's still an anomaly. A lot of people are still not aware that this car even exists. Like I said, this was kind of the last hurrah for the front-wheel drive platform. Then the G8 superseded it, and nothing like this car was ever seen again. Now, if you happen to find one of these that is available for sale, they still might be a great option to pick up if you are looking for something that's comfortable, maybe not as expensive as a GTO or something else along those lines that would have also had an LS. If you're looking for something not quite Corvette level, there weren't that many options out there for a comfortable, big four-door sedan. This would have rivaled been sold in competition with the Dodge Charger, and that would have had the RT trim level would have been probably the most comparable. So of course that's a 5.7 liter Hemi. As you know, a lot of people bought that car. This car was rumored to be pretty heavily discounted when it was faced off against the Charger, and I think the rear-wheel drive was part of that equation. So I wouldn't go so far as to call this a failed experiment. I would call it a bit of a curiosity from GM. Certainly, if you are thinking about buying one, you might want to get that transmission looked at. Who knows? Maybe these will be collectible someday. This is one way that a car becomes a sleeper. A company puts a bunch of horsepower under the hood. Not a lot of people know about it. It doesn't sell well, and when people see it out on the road, they don't even know what they're looking at. That's not how GM would have had it. I think GM would have preferred that the car had sold in much higher numbers. But nonetheless, there are a lot of sleepers from this era, particularly from GM, including those supercharged V6s, where they kind of reach sleeper status just because people don't know about them. So that's today's curiosity from the Junkyard. Thanks so much for watching.